Yeah, so welcome to our ABM talk of our May ABM talk. And it's a great pleasure to have Yochai in person in Gießen as a hybrid event. So this is our second hybrid event since the pandemic is semi-over. So I hope you guys will enjoy the talk in person at the classroom. I would just like to say a couple of words about our project, as I always do. And as for those of you who have already joined us before, you know that we gather here once a month, usually on the last Thursday of the month, but because Yochai Ataria has actually arrived from Israel in person, so we've done it as a hybrid event and in person with the University of Gießen. So that's great. And usually we meet once a month on the last Thursday of the month at 4 p.m. to discuss anything to do or anything related to seeing anti-Semitism and law. Today we're going to give the floor, because I'm not in Gießen personally, Anna Pingen, who is a colleague and a team member of the Saddle project, will introduce Yochai to everybody and also be in charge of the moderation. So it's great. Thank you, Anna, for taking over. And I am looking forward to this amazing talk and a great discussion that will follow.
Thank you, Reut. Thank you all for being here and online. We're really happy to see as many people. I want to introduce now Professor Yochai Ataria. He's an associate professor at Tel Hai College in Israel. He obtained his PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 2014. The title of his PhD is The Phenomenology of Trauma, the case of dissociation during trauma. From 2014 to 2016, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the Weizmann Institute of Science in the Department of Neurobiology. He's the author of numerous books. Among them, we have The Structural Trauma of Western Culture that came out in 2017. We have Body Disownership in Complex Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, 2018. Not in Our Brain in 2019. And in 2021 came the book Primo Levi and Katzetnik, The Map of the Territory. In addition, he co-edited several volumes, among others, Interdisciplinary Handbook of Culture and Trauma in 2016, Jean Améry Beyond the Mind's Limits, 2019, and Kafka New Perspective. And I would give the floor now to you to start your presentation.
Great, thanks. So here's my book, if you want to, the relevant book for today. Okay, so I would really like to thank Reut for this kind of invitation. Great to see so many people here. And really, it's a great honor to be here, and really in great campus and great restaurant, and it's nice. So, so in this talk, I will try to rethink, in a way, the suicide of Primo Levi, as you all know, considered to be one of the most important witnesses of Auschwitz. Wait, my water. I think everybody agrees that the fact that his book, that Primo Levi's book shaped the way we understand the phenomenology of the prisoner in the camps. But furthermore, Primo Levi also responsible for the notion of the gray zone, which is, as you all know, I guess, fundamental for our understanding of how ordinary people become mass murderers. And we will back to this issue in the end of the talk. So, and given that, so if we think about Primo Levi's suicide, so it remains a big puzzle, and a deep, disturbing puzzle even today. And it's not a puzzle only for his reader, but also from a theoretical perspective. I'm guessing, I'm assuming you read the paper, and in the paper I really explain why the theoretical issue. So, and I do hope that if we will be able to rethink Levi's suicide together, we will be able to re-examine the very meaning of being a survivor and the ability of bearing witness. So, whereas in the first part of this talk, I will compare Levi's suicide to Améry's suicide. In the second part of this talk, I will try to rethink Levi's death from the point of view of of Franz Kafka, as you all know, for me, is the biggest author of the 20th century, a kind of a prophet. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, the talks, by the way, will be exactly 45 minutes, maybe a bit less. And the most important thing is, of course, the discussion later, but yeah. So the original German title of Améry's book, At the Mind's Limit, Beyond the Guilt and Atonement, attempts to overcome by one who was overcome, published in 1966, is symbolic of his absolute defeat. With the first blow, and they will have a lot of citation, and it's very clear in the presentation. So with the first blow from the policeman's fist, a part of our life ends, and it can never be again revived. Améry does believe that whoever was tortured stay tortured. To Améry's mind, torture never really ends. It was for a while. It's still not over. Sorry. And since torture is ongoing, one can never really recover. In fact, the more time passes, the more the wound becomes infected. No, it's fine. I can see it's fine. He's suffering from an insidious disease, which is growing worse with years. Many believe that given Améry's writing style, his suicide seems like a natural continuation of existential state. Namely, is a dead man on leave or terminal patient. Essentially, Levi himself understands Améry's suicide as a result of self-accusation and rage directed inwards, instead of the actual murderers. And with this in mind, I would like to examine more closely the dialogue between Levi and Améry. Améry and Levi were both Auschwitz survivors, and although Levi did not remember Améry, it seems that they were housed in the same lager. Famously, Améry accused Levi of forgiving. Levi, for his part, tries to explain not only that the accusation itself is false, but that in fact it could not be otherwise, as he himself categorically rejects the possibility of forgiveness. I do not know of many human actions which can be undo or wrong, he says. However, the very fact that Levi felt the need to defend himself against Améry's accusation showed just how grave it was. The disagreement between Levi and Améry was not limited to the subject of forgiveness, atonement, and understanding. Thus, a careful reading revealed a deep-seated, albeit well-concealed, hostility between the two. By the way, after the talk of yesterday, I tried to think a lot about this hostility between a lot of survivors, even between we talk about Wiesel. So it seems there is some kind of tension in the dialogue between different kinds of survivors, like in a way respect, but also this need to differentiate one from another and to say, yeah, it's not the same experience. Améry and Levi were both educated professionals, but that did not mean that they suffer a similar experience. Certainly, says Améry, there were also differences. In the camp chosen here as an example, chemists, for instance, were employed in their profession, as was my bridesmaid, Primo Levi. As you can see, this sentence is filled with tension. The fact that Améry stressed that in reality, there were differences is not incidental. There are always differences, and in the camps, those differences were a matter of life and death. Without doubt, Levi would be the first to support this notion. After 9 months in the camp, Levi began to work in his profession in a laboratory indoors, while Améry worked as an unskilled labor, who had to do his job in the open, which meant in most cases that the sentence was already passed on him. Améry distinguished himself from Levi. Although both were professionals and both understood German, unlike Levi, at least by Améry accounts, Améry was not at the bottom. Améry was at the bottom, or very close to the bottom of the food chain. As you can see, Améry established a hierarchy of suffering. Yes, we were both there, he says, but we did not share the same experience. I survived, but I was still one of the drowned. And once again, in a bigger context, it's an interesting question why the need to all the time to stress the gaps. According to Améry, although Levi was there, he did not think low enough. He was not one of the drowned. Yeah, the word drowned is important because Levi's book is The Save and the Drowned, his last book. It is in fact a kind of inverse hierarchy of holiness. And it's, by the way, it's also a continuation of our lunch talk about the link between trauma and mystical experience. The lower one sank, the holier, enlightened, and insightful they become. With regard to the camp in particular, and society and humanity in general. Levi was, of course, a prisoner at Auschwitz and could write about his experience there. And yet, he never reached rock bottom and was therefore insufficiently enlightened and incapable of fully understanding the Nazi system. Only the drowned can write Auschwitz. Essentially, Levi himself accepts this principle, which he repeats numerous times through in his book, beginning with his first book, If This Is a Man. Améry further claimed that, as an intellectual, he suffered more than others in the camp for the following reason. After a certain time, we accepted not only the SS logic, but also the SS system of values. As a result, the torture develops a tragic dialect of self-destruction and a sense of admiration toward the torturer. For he's not the one who can reduce a person so entirely to a body and a whimpering prey of death, a god, or at least a demigod. In a very feel of rage world, he is no more than an accident. Améry demands to rewrite history without forgetting the victims and without ignoring rage and resentment. Or in a way, once again, Ruth, to continue our own private dialogue, he insists to write history from this very frozen moment of rage. I don't know if it's even possible. Améry demands a radical. For example, he calls upon young people who were born or came of age after the war to reject the previous generation. You should have seen, and your youth give you no special privilege, and break with your father. I just want a small comment here, like a personal comment without talking about names. So I've been with a colleagues of mine in the age of 65 in Frankfurt for the morning, and I was shocked that in a way he rejects his father. He said, I hate Germany for the past. I was a bit amazed that actually Améry demands a radical, but in many cases are being fulfilled for some people at least. So as you can see, Améry is up to his neck with resentment. He does present the pitiful state of the survivor, forever trapped in the victimhood. Ignore and silence at first, and then when he's finally heard, he feels like a prostitute selling her flesh. You know that the book of Améry was also on the radio. What dehumanized me has become a commodity, which I offer for sale, it says. Améry is a survivor who has lost everything: identity, homeland, language, and body. Even in his own eyes, he's nothing more than a stain, someone for whom everyone is waiting to disappear. Essentially, once we accept this kind of negative dialect, Améry's suicide seems almost inevitable. Améry, at least to his own mind, living on a borrowed time. I will not go into it, but Primo Levi has a book, a story in this name, Borrowed Time. But I think we don't have the time to go into it. To be a Jew, he says, is to be a dead man on leave, someone to be murdered, who only by chance was not yet where he properly belonged. Okay, so I do think, this is the second time I'm talking about this book, so in a way it's a bit different to talk about the book and actually writing him. And in a retrospect, I must say that I think that this sentence is simply essentially to understand a lot of what the survivor undergo after Auschwitz. So after Auschwitz is like a name code, of course. It's not just Auschwitz. They feel they belong to the death or something like this. Having truly internalized the other gaze, Améry identity as a Jew is totally negative. The anti-Semite forced the Jew into a situation in which he permitted his enemy to stamp him with a self-image. I just want to say, I have like comments, but this is a very weak part of Améry, which he tried to be like, for him, Sartre is like the best philosopher, but Sartre is a really weak philosopher, and he tried in a way he wanted Sartre to love him in a way, and he tried to make adjustments in his book. So this is, it's less authentic if you read Améry. As a Jew, he asserts, every day I knew I lost my trust in the world. Améry sees that it is not the sanity of the victims that should be questioned. Rather, it is the world which has gone mad, and they alone, namely the survivors, have maintained their sanity. At the same time, however, the victim cannot escape the consequences of the world's insanity. Améry is the absolute victim. Despite this fact, or precisely because of it, he is able to see the world with lucid clarity. And it's, once again, going back to our discussion about the ability to see reality because of the trauma. To return to the dialogue between Levi and Améry, Levi refers to Améry, and this is important part, a potential friend and a privileged debater. He described Améry's life as one that knew neither peace nor the quest for peace. Levi attributes Améry's suicide to a problem of identity. For the young Hans, which is Améry's name from birth, to be a Jewish is simultaneously impossible and obligatory. This is where the crack begins. This crack pursues him, namely Améry, until his death, and ultimately provoked it. As we saw, a sensitive point in the time in which Levi and Améry, a very important time is the dialogue about the meeting or meeting which would happen or did not happen, because Levi is very, very famous for his, in a way, he has like a strong memory. And if Levi say, I cannot remember it, if you know Levi, it's in a way saying it didn't happen. You should be familiar with Levi, okay? In order to see the gentle point here. Améry had already been there a number of months at the time Levi's arrival. Although Levi's attitude to Améry is generally positive, there is a lot of tension in this sentence, even in the way he introduced Améry as young Hans, a Jew. Levi further stresses that despite his excellent memory, he does not remember Améry. Levi chooses to leave this possibility open and simply bring it to the reader's attention. Okay, the fact that Améry might actually confuse him with another famous Levi, the author, Carlo Levi. Okay, so they're a bit like punching one another in a, but in a very, as you will see, it will become more and more aggressive and more radical. The tension increases when Levi stressed that, unlike Améry, I felt only moderately humiliated by manual labor. It's all very ironical. Adding upon reflection, obviously I was not yet intellectual enough. What was wrong with it, with that anyway, he says. In this passage, with his pure surgical irony, Levi appears to accuse Améry Meyer, as he calls him over and again. And once again, even the way he called him is, it's all like punches. It's always like hitting, of having created unnecessary drama around the question of the intellectual in Auschwitz. So in a sense, beneath the surface, Levi wondered whether Améry's life as an intellectual was in fact so exceptional, and whether his approach was not in fact an attempt to create a distinct elite, a German elite once again. Levi stressed that Améry, as a German intellectual, had an important advantage. understanding the German language. Although it is true, as Améry himself points out obsessively, I must add, that he was wounded by the ruin of his mother tongue, in the context of the camp, he had a tremendous advantage over other prisoners. As Levi stresses, we realize that knowledge of German was the dividing line. Those of us who understood them and responded articulately were able to establish the semblance of human relationship. And therefore, Améry's suffering was different from that of us, speakers of other languages, who were reduced to the condition of deaf mutes. His suffering, if I may, was more spiritual than physical. Levi takes a step forward, suggesting that in reality, due to his complete foreignness, his own suffering was in fact worse than Améry's. The way we experienced the inability to communicate was much more radical. And his criticism of Levi is delicate yet sharp, and as you will see right away, even deadly. Levi arguing that Améry's very survival may have been due to his knowledge of German. Levi go on delivering a ruthless message, well hidden within the parentheses. As you will see, Levi is like an art of the parentheses. He know how to use this tool. Okay, parentheses, yeah, you all know. So by nature, the intellectual, and see the use in the parentheses, the German intellectual, allow me to add to this formulation, tends to become complicit. So that is cooperation, complicit with power, and therefore to sanction it. So this is a huge thing to say. It's a direct hit in a way. As I see it, it is hard to imagine a more serious accusation. Levi actually claimed, even if indirectly, that Améry's suffering is not the suffering of the intellectual, but in fact, the unique suffering of the German intellectual. This notion has far-reaching implication. This is indeed a crucial moment for the question of Levi's suicide. Améry described how in the camp he learned to hit back, but this was by no means radical transformation. His own inner world had been and remained the dialect world of Hegel and the like, demanding the worship of power for its own sake. The conclusion is that Améry's suffering stemmed not only from the action of the Germans, but from his own inability to change his inner world, a world which is filled with German culture. In other words, Améry did not commit suicide because he traded blows with Germany, but since he himself was German. Once again, so Améry is all the way through absorbed in the German culture. So while Améry is fight with the German, he's actually fighting with himself. It's an inner struggle between doubles. And hence, he trades blow with himself. Indeed, Améry recounts that any homesickness he felt was tainted by self-hatred. Améry never managed to dissociate from the German culture, which is why, according to Levi, he killed himself. That being said, upon closer examination, the way Levi treats Améry, okay, so in a way, we can read the accusation in a more radical sense, okay? And I will do it, but you should decide if you accept it or not. But as you will see, this is the word of Levi, it's not my word. The German intellectual tends to become a partner in the crimes of power. In other words, knowing the language of the German allowed Améry to represent the SS, becoming cooperated, not merely intellectually, on the intellectual level, but also in practice, in reality. With this in mind, I would like to return for a moment to Levi's suicide. Despite Levi's famous assertion, I ask for justice, but I am personally incapable of throwing punches or answering a blow with a blow. But by the way, when you read it, I'm not sure he seemed like an expert in punches. The Jewish American author Ozik, okay, this is the part I send you to read. So I'm treating you as if you read it. So the Jewish American author Ozik insists that in The Drown and the Save, which is Levi's last book, Levi has traded blow with the German people. Note, however, that Levi is not German, but Italian. And hence, when it comes to trading blows with the German people, we cannot compare between Levi and Améry. Okay, Levi is trading blows with the German, Améry is trading blows, punches with himself. Therefore, Odic argument, according to which Levi hit in a way himself, fails to deliver the goods. From Levi's perspective, Améry was and remained a German, which is why he referred to him over and again as Hans Meyer or Améry Meyer all the time. In a way, he says that the actual fight is between Améry and Meyer. When Améry is a German, trades blows with the German people, it is himself he cannot forgive, and with whom he trades blows. In effect, Améry and Meyer struggle with one another. It is an inner struggle. So with this in mind, it's very clear that Levi, that Levi and Améry are fundamentally different. Whereas the process that Améry undergoes stems from his strong identification with the German, Levi was not raised in German, and to the extent that he felt anything at all toward the German people, it was an external entity, rather than an inner struggle or a struggle against the father, like in the case of Améry. To conclude the first part of this talk, although an attempt to compare Améry's suicide to Levi's suicide may be interesting, even enlightening, as I hope you saw, they do not reveal the reason for Levi's suicide. With this in mind, I would like to present a new way to think about Levi's suicide. His agreement to translate Kafka. If we wish to understand the relationship between Levi and Kafka, it is only natural to begin. It is only natural to begin with the mental process which Levi underwent while translating Kafka's book, The Trial. To translate the translation took Levi 6 months, beginning in the spring of 1982. In an interview he gave on May 83, a year later, shortly after the publication of his Italian translation of The Trial, Levi admits that he had been somewhat hesitating, he do it too fast in a way, without thinking enough, in accepting the publisher proposal. For some reason, Levi believed he would be able to translate Kafka while maintaining a distance. I never thought it would involve me so deeply. Levi's feeling as he translated The Trial were complicated. I felt assaulted by this book and I had to defend myself. It runs through you like a spear, like an arrow. Levi is aware of the fact that many of Kafka's readers feel the same way, and translating seems to escalate the problem. Translating is more than reading. Translating is to examine under a microscope the fabric of the book, to penetrate it, to become entangled and involved with it. You travel with Joseph K. Okay, Joseph K. is the main character in Kafka's book. Or in all Kafka books, there is this character K. Are you familiar with Kafka? You read it? So K is like K is Kafka, and I would add another issue that I'm not talking about Katzetnik, but the K of Katzetnik is also in a way throw you back to the K of Kafka. And there is a very important story of Levi, which called M. This is the middle name of Primo Levi, which is also a resemblance of the K, but this is a whole different lecture. Okay, so he said that you travel with Joseph K through dark mazes, on twisting paths which never lead where you expect. Levi continues, translating The Trial, I have understood the reason for my hostility toward Kafka. It is from a defense born of fear. The fear Levi described is not generalized, but stems from, okay, and this is really critical, the very particular reason according to which Kafka was a Jew and I am a Jew. Okay, and even I found this picture which they even seems a little bit alike. The trial is open with surprise and unjustified arrest. he says, Levi, and my career too opened with a surprise and unjustified arrest. In his biography of Levi, which is, there is many biographies, but this is without doubt the best one. In his biography of Levi, Thomasson argues that the more immersed Levi became in the translation of the trial, the more he believed he resembled to Kafka. The resemblance is not just between Levi and Kafka, but also between Levi's, if this is a man, and Kafka's The Trial. As time went on, in the summer of 1982 progressed, Levi discovered even greater similarity with Kafka protagonist, Joseph K. Okay, and this is for me like the crucial moment of the book. Like once I read it, I felt like everything is falling. I found myself involved in the character of Joseph K. I accused myself as he did. Okay, I will read it once again. Okay, this is the words of Primo Levi, 4 years before he committed suicide. I found myself involved in the character of Joseph K. and I accused myself as he did. I must say that as a reader of Kafka, I don't know who of you really read Kafka, but as one who read Kafka over and again, you do develop this sense of shame and guilt. The translation of The Trial took a heavy price from Levi. In December of that year, Levi told the Australian historian Herman Langbein that he was going through his worst period since Auschwitz. Furthermore, Levi confessed to Thomasson that, looking back, I wish I hadn't. The mission disturbed me badly. I went into a deep, deep depression. In Kafka, Levi saw a kind of a prophet. Kafka is an author I admire. I do not love him, I admire him. I fear of him, like a great machine which is going to crash in on you. Like the prophet who tell you the day you will die. Okay, actually there is a story of Primo Levi which called Borrowed Time, which exactly describes this experience. Levi was always considered an optimist. This was also Levi, the way Levi saw himself. After having translated Kafka, however, he notes, today, my thoughts are quite different. I think that only another lager can be born out of the fact of the lager. That only bad can come out of this experience. With this in mind, it may be more accurate to say that Levi did not undergo any fundamental change following the translation. Rather, instead, something fundamental, maybe something that had previously been hidden and repressed, was suddenly revealed to him. In this context, it is interesting to recall the words with which Levi concludes the story, The King of the Jews. This story, which appeared in La Stampa in November 77, 5 years before the translation of Kafka, deal with Romakovsky, the chairman of the Judenrat in the Lodz ghetto. And he say, so like Romakovsky, we too are so dazzled by power and money, hence we forget the fragility of our existence. We forget that we are all in the ghetto, and that the ghetto is fenced in, and that outside the fence are the lords of death, and a little way off, the train is waiting. It seems to me that this remark, which is less about Romakovsky than about Western society in general, reveal Levi's in a Kafkaesian world. I think that someone is not muted. Hi, it's Dina. Hey, Dina.
Hi.
Hi, but you are not muted.
Hi.
Hi, you are not muted. Before even having translated Kafka. In Kafka's writing, the question is not if the individual will be crushed, but rather when and especially how. The end of the trial is the ultimate example, and Levi perfectly understands it. And it's a bit long, but I want to read it together, the end of the trial, because it's crucial for the argument. The repulsive corteses began once again. One of them passed the knife over K to the other, who then passed it back over K to the first. K now knew it would be his duty to take the knife as it passed from hand to hand above him and thrust it into himself. But he did not do it. Instead, he twisted his neck, which was still free, and looked around. He was not able to show his full worth, was not able to take all the work from the official bodies. He lacked the rest of the strength he needed, and this final shortcoming was the fault of whoever had denied to him. But the hands of one of the gentlemen were laid on K's throat, while the other pushed the knife deep into his heart and twisted it twice. As his eyesight failed, K saw the two gentlemen cheek by cheek, close in front of his face, watching the result. Like a dog, he said. It was as if the shame of it should outlive him. Levi's reaction to this scene speaks for itself. And once again, I want to read it, the full citation. Think of the end of the book, the final scene, the blue sky, and that from the execution at the hand of two men. In essence, two automata who hardly ever speak, who swap cross insult and are wholly indifferent. They are quite expert in the rules of execution, and they want to do everything just so, according to their orders. This ending is so cruel, so unexpectedly cruel, that if I had a young child, I would spare him. I fear it would disturb him, make him suffer, although of course it is the truth. Okay, and this is really the end, and it's really, I think it's talk for itself. We will die. Each of us will die, more or less like that. So you really see how Levi internalized Kafka's, and by the way, it's really good to see. I think I'm not familiar, I was not familiar, and it's a bit surprised our dialogue, but yeah, literature has its amazing power, as you can see. With this in mind, I would like to suggest that just as Kafka's characters are crushed by the system, the reader is crushed by Kafka himself. And thus, in the process of translating Kafka, Levi is completely crushed. It is well known that Levi always pursued order and logic, almost obsessively so. That being said, it is clearer why the struggle against Kafka is at once impossible and brutal. A little bit, I'm now thinking like the inner struggle of Améry Maya. It's a bit like. And not because Kafka's conclusion is that there is no order, but precisely because there is an order and a method. Indeed, as Levi wrote, nothing in German was accidental. Levi's translation of the trial received a number of critical reviews. Okay, the translation was really, really bad. It wasn't a translation of the book. It was a whole new book in a way. But this would have come as no surprise to Levi, who had intentionally taken certain liberties, and what can say too much liberties, with Kafka. The main problem with Levi's translation of the trial is his inability to overcome the need to explain and to clarify. Namely, to stop asking why. In retrospect, we may suggest that Levi's decision to translate Kafka in his own way was not accidental, but a matter of survival. It was, so I believe, Levi's last attempt to save himself from Kafka's steamroller, a failed attempt that took a heavy price from Levi. Not only did Levi never return to Kafka, but even while translating Kafka, by the way, I must say that if you read Kafka, there is time in life which you simply cannot read even one line of Kafka. You just feel it's too much for you. Like in a way, I told my son, there is time which I cannot hear Pink Floyd. It's too much sometimes to hear this music. So it's not only that Levi did not return to Kafka, but even while he translated Kafka, he rejected or tried to reject the Kafkaesian formula, the very same formula he refused to accept at Auschwitz. In his first book, If This Is a Man, Levi recounts an episode which occurred soon after his arrival to the camp. A guard snatched away an icicle which Levi had broken off to slake his thirst. When Levi asked why he had done so, the guard replied that there is no why here. To some extent, it is the same answer which Levi gets from Kafka. There is no why here, only a system which crushes the individual. It is pointless to ask why. One must simply accept it. So too, when Levi's bankmate Shmulek tries to explain the selection and Levi is skeptical. Shmulek remarks in Yiddish, he doesn't want to understand. What Levi refused to understand is the uselessness of the question why. So although his writing proved how sharp and aware Levi was, how clearly he saw reality, how well he understood what few others did, he was often accused of refusing to understand. So to me, at least it seemed that in reality, Levi understood quite well the various process which took place at the concentration and death camp. Having said that, I would like to nevertheless argue that he refused to understand something deeper, much deeper. Something cannot be explained. Essentially, it was his obsessive search for an explanation that led him to one of the most important and shocking insights into the Holocaust. Both the victim as well as the murderers were, in fact, ordinary human beings. And under certain conditions, almost anyone can become a capo. Levi, too, is an ordinary human being. Levi, so it seems to me, could not live with this notion, at least not after the process he undergo while translating Kafka. Levi has been trapped within his own theoretical world. He drowned and lost himself within the gray zone. Indeed, when Levi read, when we live, if we read Levi really carefully, in particular what is being hidden once again within the parenthesis, it becomes clear that Levi has lost himself within the gray zone. You did not take anyone's place, he said. You did not beat anyone. And now in the parenthesis, but would you have had the strength? You did not accept appointments, but none were offered. With this in mind, I would like to suggest that it is Levi's obsession to explain everything that had led him to his death. In the words of Imre Kertész, a survivor of Buchenwald and a Nobel Prize winner, it's going back to our discussion, how to begin to read Auschwitz in a way. In the end, we ourselves demand explanation of ourselves. Until in the end, we succeed in annihilating everything around us, ourselves included. In other words, explaining ourselves to death. To conclude this talk, Kafka is no stranger to Levi. During his life, Levi tried to avoid Kafka, until in the moment of weakness, he agrees to translate him and all his defenders crushes. Levi sees himself as Joseph K. and in so doing, understands that he must die and that his death like a dog is inevitable. Joseph K., however, failed to complete the task and therefore, instead of dying free, become the miserable victim of a murder. In such a world, a great Kafkaesian world, there is only one rescue: to rewrite the trial. That is what Levi did in his life, or more precisely, hoped to accomplish with his death. Unlike Kay, Levi does not wait for someone else to do the job for him. The combination of the world of Kafka, of the Kafkaesian machine, and the gray zone is deadly, inescapable. Essentially, although Kafka is only a writer, Kafka's world is not theoretical at all. Thus, it became reality at Auschwitz and tainted all who were there, both murderers and victims. In the word, once again, of Imre Kertész, under the totalitarian regime, executioners and victims alike perform a total service in a single cause, though naturally, that service is by no means an identical service. And he continues, no one can remain untainted. As usual, Levi's message leaves room for complexity. After Auschwitz, Levi wondered whether this is a man, knowing that positive answer to the question would lead to a rational and reasonable solution, namely that one must end one's life in a world which cannot be changed. For a long time, it seems that Levi could imagine other alternative to the answer, this is in fact a man. We found the man in Auschwitz. After translating translating Kafka's The Trial, however, no alternative remained, only suicide.